describe its purpose. And I'm going to share this right now. Right here. So, why is Indiana looking for, I'm trying to, this is basically a full story packaged into 2 pages, and so it's obviously condensed and meant to be kind of a cut to the chase story. The question is, why is this happening? Basically, what is the demand? And this is a story that explains what that narrative is. We were contracted in 2012/13. This is item number 1, to evaluate and identify sort of drought-proof or more resilient water supplies for utility, and we looked along the Wabash River, along the Ohio River, and identified sites that looked promising because of their geology and their mapped, already existing interpreted conditions. And so we identified one of those locations downstream of Lafayette. And that's just because of the mapped characteristics of the aquifers that had been studied at that point. And more recently, this is item number 2, there's this question that in Indianapolis may need a lot more water over time. This is over a 50-year period. They're talking about 100, that's for everything, not just for public supply. This is for public supply and commercial and industrial and other uses. They may need about 100 MGD of new water in central Indiana. And the district is attracting manufacturing companies that each of them are asking for or needing a lot of water. So the idea is that's why there's a need, is there's been both central Indiana needs more water, and then this LEAP district would in fact need more water. So the question is, how do we move the water, or is that realistic? So that's kind of the backstory. Anybody that needs to or wants to talk about this, you can either ask me a question about that right now, but we were effectively contracted by the IEDC to help identify supplies. And the idea of the regional water availability is that we just looked at the project that was done in central Indiana. There hasn't been an exact replicate of that work done for the Wabash Basin. We kind of were looking at most of the basins that were draining into the watersheds that drained into the West Fork of the White River, and not as many that drained into the Wabash. But that project it kind of showed us a path. How do you answer that question? So the idea is that water budget approach is conservative. It's very much a kind of looking at the worst time of year, et cetera, and defining water availability in a kind of conservative way, but using data, not using some judgments that are integrated. The data-centric approach is using these data sets from the gauges to identify how much water is available in each of the subbasins, and then collectively in the river itself. And so that availability project is also part of what will be done for the Wabash River. It'll be a quicker version of what we did in the central Indiana, but it's going to have to be done to identify the excess, if there is excess water. Excess is a kind of a term of art, so don't anybody flip out about it. It's a very specific term that means far above, above and beyond the demands in each basin. And what do we need to do to go through this project? The technical part of the water supply development. This is a list of the things that we need to do that will be required to develop the resource. This work is more about a question of hydraulics. Will the aquifer adjacent to the river, is it connected so that if you pump water from the adjacent aquifer, how much of that or what fraction of that water that you pump out will be coming from induced recharge from the river, and how much will be coming from the aquifer, basically, that would have gone to the river if you didn't have the well there. So we're going to drill and construct test wells along the river where we have access, and we're going to monitor the test pumping that we do, and we will also have hand-driven piezometers in the riverbed, and we will be tracking the diurnal temperature fluctuation as it goes through the sediments, through the river bottom and into the aquifer, so that we can see what the fluxes of water are during pumping. And once we know the gradients and then these thermal signatures that move through the subsurface or sediments into the aquifer, we can compute how much water was moving through that same system. So we kind of have all the pieces of the puzzle, and we can parameterize the resistance of the riverbed between the river itself and the aquifer that's below. And then we're going to look at different designs. We're going to see how could one, generate flows, and what might collector wells look like, or what might vertical wells look like, or whatever. We're focusing on collector wells because we think that would be able to satisfy these demands. So there's two parts I've talked about right now. I've already mentioned that there's a water budget piece that says how much water is there. And the second piece is, if it's there, how could we pull it? How could we move that water from point A to point B? By the way, this is how all wells work. This is kind of a deeper investigation because of the dimensions of the project. And I think this is important to the group. We are going to be setting up this month a technical advisory group. You would have representatives from the primary regulatory and water agencies in the state, along with the USGS. The Army Corps of Engineers will be involved, but I don't know if they will be directly involved, just because they have the administrative and regulatory authority over the upstream reservoirs that might be part of how to protect against low flows. So the Army Corps of Engineers is already talking to the DNR, and at a very high level. And once we understand the possible need, we will be talking to them about how to alter their current administrative pools in the Mississinewa and Salamone reservoirs that then could be released during low flows if low flows ever occurred below a certain threshold. So there's kind of a protection against low flow exceedances built into the idea. So we're trying to pull all these pieces together and have someone looking over our shoulders from a technical perspective. What did we forget? Are you sure about that? How did you choose these ratios to figure out, whether excess meant actually more water or whatever? But all of these things will be done. This is all going to happen in the next about 1 year. We're going to have to test, we're going to have to measure, we're going to have to report on the available water in the basin, and then the approaches to obtaining water. So this is something, and the conversations that go on with this are probably going to be continuous. But I'm expecting this group will meet at least monthly to hear a report on each month's activities, progress. We might have a field thing where we go out and look at it. In addition to this work that I just described, there's going to be the aerial electromagnetics, is that what it's called? AEM?
Yeah.
Like they're doing in the Illinois Basin, in the Kankakee Basin, we're going to be doing, we have in our budget funds to look at this bend in the river for the aquifer properties there, so that we can, without getting access to the property, we can actually identify where the aquifer exists and what its characteristics are in terms of its dimensions. So that will help us in terms of our evaluation of the system itself. So Jane, your group would be a part of this, would be on this oversight, this group, this TAG group, and as I mentioned, all the other agencies as well. Are there questions? I mean, there have to be questions, right? So
Yeah.
spit them out,
Yeah, no, thanks for that run through, Jack. My first question is, because this assessment is related to the new expanding industry with the LEAP Lebanon project there, is this assessment like deciding if that construction could take place, or is this more of like the construction is taking place and this is ways to measure how it will change? Or I guess, how does this assessment fit in with what will or will not occur with the LEAP?
Well, there's feedbacks, right? It's the question is can that much water be moved? Is that too much? Is there twice that much, or is there not? And of course, some years there might be, at some times of year, there's plenty of water there, or too much. Other years, not so much, or other times of year, that's not so much. So we've danced through that data problem of saying, well, how do you define where available water line, where do you draw the lines for availability? But that is, that's one of the questions. So if we were to find out, for example, that we weren't able to obtain that much water from the aquifers or from that system, the river aquifer system, yeah, there would have to be some other water supply consideration. Other things that people are interested in that similar to that is that the development itself is going to require conservation practices on the site, on the LEAP site. So there's going to be all sorts of water reuse and recycling and done there on the property. We're not in charge of that piece, but it only makes sense from a water supply perspective. That's kind of the other side of the water availability question, and can we change the demand? So the idea is the world is changing as we're sitting here right now, and this is kind of the new conversation. Well, why don't we change demand, not increase supply? So the IEDC has become very familiar in the past few months with how it's done in the Netherlands or whatever, where people really have to reuse their supplies. And they're adopting these, I consider to be the most modern practices and objectives, which I think are the only way you can do these kinds of jobs. You can't. It isn't 1950, you know. We don't just dam up a river and figure out what to do with it later, or what happened bad after we did it. So this is going to be more thoughtful and I think progressive in lots of good ways. And as was mentioned before with Hamilton County, we're going to be instrumenting all of the homeowner wells in the vicinity or other wells that we select, maybe monitoring wells that we even install, for real-time feedback about the effects of pumping, like right now. Like we can watch the changes happen over time, and that's something that not just we would have access to, but others as a part of this group would also be able to view. That's built into this project.
Thanks. If I can go ahead. So that's related to what I wanted to ask. So it's great to hear about all the studies and the homeowners are one, and you're doing so many others. One of the questions that folks have here is to what extent the data that you collect will be public and how you will make it public so that other researchers could do their own analyses of it, for example, now or in the future.
First of all, yes. The answer is yes. The data is all going to be public, and we're going to release it to, especially to the Purdue group because they've shown interest, but also the USGS and DNR. There's going to be quite a few interested hydrologists, let's say. This is going to be a new area where people are suddenly interested because of this change, you know, this question. So, yes, it will be made available directly to all the researchers that are interested. And there are, as I say, there are many.
Okay, so there's nothing confidential about these.
Not the data, no. No, the data, these data, I imagine them as being the gap that we've never filled in the gap. We've got a bunch of data around Indianapolis, and then there's a big gap in the map until you have more information or more data. And so I feel like we're filling in a bit of a blank spot in our understanding. So I think it's really important, Jane, that there are multiple parties that reach the same or similar conclusions. Otherwise, there's something wrong, probably so.
Okay, so just to go even further than that, that's great. Are there opportunities for the groundwater researchers, not myself, but to actually participate in some of the research, how the funding is going? Is there, opportunities beyond your?
Yeah, I think so, and I could help facilitate those conversations. I don't know what they might be, but this is a hurry up sort of a project, but I think of that as separate from the data sort of piece, which is to me a scientific information. And I have myself a list of project research ideas that are not, like, I'm not going to do it, but I have a lot of questions that are built into this story. There are subsurface ecosystems that I think are really important and interesting, that are going to be below actually the stream bed itself. The Dutch and the Germans do a ton of research on the ecosystem of the stream bed. Just the stream bed, not the hyperrheic zone, but the biological community that sits at the interface at the base of the river. And this is not just macro invertebrates, it's all sorts of the other smaller fauna and flora that are in that system. There's another oxygenated zone that is sort of the hyperrheic zone underneath. The big rivers have different systems than small rivers in terms of their ecosystems, but there's another ecosystem question or investigation that could go into that area. Those are sort of the ecological, but they're relevant because they alter water chemistry, they alter, maybe not flow, but they're relevant to water quality. And there are a lot of hydraulic questions that are not understood yet. You know, there's that are how these systems interact and how the changes in the fraction that you obtained from the river might change over time and how that might affect the system.
Yeah, this is great. So I have a couple more questions, but I'll let somebody else go ahead and
Garth, do you want to say something, Garth?
I do. I've got two
Okay.
questions.
Sure.
One, any thoughts to tapping into the Tays deeper in that area? I know they intersect as an alternative source to complement. And two, the comment or blurb about the Corps adjusting their operating reservoir procedures to augment base flow is surprising to me. What is the likelihood of that happening to support the project that would presumably be augmenting base flows? Thank you.
Sure. I'm all stuck on your second question. What was your first question again?
Tays.
Tays, and is as
Tays.
an alternative source of water, deeper, and asking the question, are they connected to it?
Yes.
That's actually, I wish we knew. So that's actually, that's one of the hydraulic questions that we have to understand is that are they, if you pump one, how much water would come from the other, basically, right? If you pump the shallow zone of this and you're intercepting mostly, and I've got a little PowerPoint just for this question, but the fact is that it's very unlikely if our aim and actual pumping facilities are made to induce recharge from the river, we're pretty sure that we can't really take that much from the surrounding aquifer, let alone the Tays that is below it. So we're not sure. I can't answer the question, Garth, because I don't know the answer. I just don't have the data to answer it. But it's the same question we're asking ourselves as well. It's actually relevant to both geochemistry, of course, the effect of the withdrawal on other people who are in that aquifer. That's important. But we're trying to have the sensors help us with that understanding, and of course the testing help us with that understanding. And the Army Corps side of this is highly likely because those two reservoirs are not used for anything except flood storage to reduce flood flows in the Wabash. That's their sole function, and all their pool is dedicated to that. This would take, if we use the, let's just say we need to turn on that tap for a month and a half. That would take a little less than 2 feet of water in each of those two reservoirs to do that. And that's to supply more than the flow that is being taken out, but to actually exceed that flow. So the numbers are in our favor. It's an agency of the U.S. government, so that's maybe no disparaging remark here, but to all you USGS people, but it's harder to get through because it's an Army Corps. It's the Army Corps, not someone else. But our current leadership in the state DNR is very familiar with this particular ask because the head of one of our chiefs at the DNR came from Missouri, where they did this at regular intervals. They had to change pool allocations.
I'm familiar. I have time in Missouri too, on some of those big Osage River reservoirs. And,
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm following you. That makes sense.
Do
Thanks.
you know Ryan Miller? Have you ever met him?
Of course I do. He hired me. Yes.
Really?
Yeah,
Of course.
fact check here.
I didn't see
Who
who
was
you
it?
were with. I'm
I got a
sorry. I
fact
didn't
check.
forgot the deal. Yeah, you know.
Right,
So
yes, you go
my
there.
sense is that the likelihood is very high.
Okay.
Jack, could you expand on? You said you're pretty sure that you're not that those different bodies, whatever, are not connected. You're not going to affect them. Could you go back to that?
Sure. Actually, I don't know. The truth is, I don't know how well connected they are. They could be one. There could be layers of clay or sediments between them. They could be mixed. They could be not everywhere the same, which is usually the way it is. So that's why we're measuring. That's why we're installing and measuring water level changes in the system, that's the point of the measurements, because I don't know the answer. If I knew the answer and wasn't worried about it, or I knew even how resilient the answer was, I would just proceed without any more data collection.
Okay.
Here, we have a data gap.
Yeah,
We need to
I
know the answer to the question that everyone is asking, and that is, where does the water come from, and who will be affected by it, or what will be affected by it. So that's the job that I'm doing. is
Okay.
trying to answer that question.
Okay, you said you're pretty sure that doing one thing wouldn't affect something else. I'm sorry, Mike.
No, I did not say, I don't know. I think I said I don't know.
You said pretty sure.
I really do not know. We are not, I'm not trying to say this will cause this. I'm saying that's what the data collection and analysis and the site investigation is for.
Okay, I guess you misspoke then. Thank you.
Yep.
Jack, I have a question.
Hey, Ginger.
Outside of the science and
Hey,
into
hey.
maybe the ethical realm.
Hey, Ginger.
And I'm wondering if we're considering the possibility that we're opening the door of that, drawing from one watershed, producing into another, if that's going to open a door to move water even further, maybe across the state or intrastate, and the concerns behind that is that going to be a consideration and a thought behind this as we move through this process?
Well, you just brought it up, so it's a thought, you know, it's a question. So I'm not gonna say there's no question when you just asked a good one. So the problem is to make sure that question is informed by existing circumstance. So I'm just saying this for your benefit. As you ask that question, make sure that you understand where water's already moving between basins. It's being done all the time now. And it's being done, maybe not at these volumes, but it's being done between different watersheds all over. In fact, you know, it's happening all over central Indiana. I mean, whether we like it or not, water's moving from place to place, it's being pushed into other basins, it's now running down Pope's Run instead of it used to come in Pleasant Run or whatever. Things are happening all over the place, but we've decided as a society to not worry too much about those, let's call them smaller tributary basins, where we shift it from one small basin to the other. So without making a rule, we have said we're okay with what we're doing now, right? Whatever that is. I think when you go forward with that question of, is this an interbasin transfer? The question is, okay, when does the water get back into that river? Is it all gonna come in one place? Is it gonna come in multiple places? That might be relevant. So, and what are the issues? Like, what is it that you are concerned about with that new water? So that new water might help people on the other side. If it's riverbank filtration water, it will not impact or have fish eggs in it or whatever from the upstream place. So there won't be any, we won't get zebra mussels or whatever from such a thing. I'm just trying to be practical about what might be a problem, or eggs of another species, whatever. All that filtration is part of the protection of this and the resilience of it. So it actually is hopefully biologically neutral in terms of its effect. The water transfer is real, and it's obviously intentional. Like, these are people trying to do a thing, so we want to move water from here to there. Relative to all of it, we've done work in North Dakota, North and South Dakota. It was near Vermilion, so I think that's South Dakota. It's hard to tell them apart if you've ever been there. I mean, there's a little bit, they're different. But we did work on a 50 million gallon a day project, the Lewis and Clark Rural Water Project. And it's being expanded now. It has collector wells, angle wells, vertical wells, and it's a big well field along the Missouri River, piped over 100 miles, I think, total, or 80 miles. It's not that weird. It's weird for us. Okay, and one of the things that the project that I did for the, 10 years ago for the Indianapolis Chamber, what I found is that that Indiana has plenty of water, Indiana. And most regions have plenty of water, but not all of them at once. So one of the conclusions of that is somehow we have to move water around to make Indiana have enough for all of the future, probably just because central Indiana is what it is. So we're kind of facing reality a little bit of how do we deal with the abundance we have. The abundance we have isn't without some manipulation to make it fit the development that occurs where it occurs. So
I disagree.
yeah. Go ahead.
I disagree, but I mean, we're getting kind of far afield here. Let's concentrate on the Wabash.
Okay.
We got a couple of folks with their hands up right now.
Yeah, somebody shout
Randy
out.
was first.
Okay, Randy Bayless, I think,
Okay, let me do it. Or you can.
No,
Why don't you ask?
Randy Bayless was first.
Okay. Randy?
Hey, Jack.
Hey.
This is probably an easy one for you, if you are privy to the answer, and I think it just kind of would maybe make people a little less defensive about it. Do you know, are the plan for return flows, are you going to put the water back more or less in the vicinity of where you've taken it from?
No. I do know that. The question is, will it go back to the Wabash via which tributary, right? And so there are several along the way. I mean, there's Sugar Creek that goes kind of straight to the west, which would enter the Wabash pretty high up, relatively speaking. Eagle Creek is further down, and that would have to go through the White River drainage all the way and not get back in until Petersburg. Yeah, it's like Greencastle and Greensburg and stuff. I don't get. Yeah, but so the answer is probably no. Yeah.
And my other thought was kind of along the lines of what Garth mentioned earlier, that it seems like you'd add resilience to the system if you were mixing waters. I know a lot of water companies do that, a little groundwater, a little surface water, and kind of distribute the impacts also.
It's being thought about. So this, it's not an irrelevant question at all. It's a good question, and it's just I'm not sure, but this is another thing. Our group, we're not a part of after the water gets to its site. So there's a separate set of consulting groups that deal with the permitting of the discharge, the water that's left.
Yeah, right. That's what I thought. I just thought you might have had some meeting committed. Thanks.
Those are the two, but I do want you to think about the difference between those two. They're very different in my mind, and they might even be split. So the advantage might be to add water to the hydrologic budget of the water budget of central Indiana, the West Fork White River. That might be a good thing for them to have extra water up there, and they would need less far away. So there might be advantages there. The question is, how much can the system take? How much can be moved?
I think that was next.
yeah, Dave,
Yeah, so Jack, I had a question about, you said you were monitoring the wells and the data was going to be made available to researchers. What about the general public? Will there be a venue for the data to be released like we do for the rest of the state, for and archived? In 10 years, is this data still going to be available, or is it just going to be, in people's hard drives somewhere. And I had a follow-up question too about the wells. Also, you kind of talked about drilling when you were asking about when you were asked about the Tays. Are you going to drill into the Tays? Because that is a point, like data gap, I believe, at this point within the state. We have one well in the USGS network in the Tays, I believe in Benton County, but we don't have much after that. And then when the study's over, what happens to these wells? Are they going to be continued to be monitored or closed, that sort of thing?
So as far as I know, if you have data that we provided, it's instantly public. Is that correct? Or mostly, it's mostly public. It's for the most part, when the USGS has the data, it becomes, let me just say that I can't imagine this somehow being kept from the public. Why would it be?
Right,
This
and
is all,
I guess to answer your
Yeah.
question, if we did get the data, it would have to go in our database to make it public.
Yeah.
And there's QA things. I mean, that's why we put together that volunteer monitoring network, so we could QA things and get it in the database and make it public.
Yeah.
So I guess if that was intended, we would have to kind of go through those motions.
that will be a thing we have to go through those motions. The other thing that I want to say, especially to Garth, is that my hope is that this becomes the state DNR's whole project. This become, after we're finished, the DNR has these monitoring wells. The DNR and the state is actually going to be, this is a state project. This is not going to be a utility buying this thing and owning it probably. This is a state facility, as far as I know. And so the DNR is going to be in a position to kind of drive this and organize it and administer it. That's my understanding, my hope, is that it becomes an institutional framework for the future of how we handle data in the state on water. So my hope is it becomes just as public as the Significant Water Withdrawal Facilities database or any of those others. And those questions, those conversations, Dave, we have to have to make sure that we properly have formats and whatever quality assurance methods, etc.
I think
Jane, do
Jane
you
was
want to
next, I
ask me a
think.
question?
Yep, Jane's got her hand up.
I do, but I didn't get called on yet, so. thank you.
Sorry, Jane, you're up, Jane. If we need to make it official, you're up.
I'm also taking a lot of notes, so no, this is very interesting.
Sorry, yeah.
I'm so glad I came. So I wanted, Ginger called it an ethics question. I say it's more a policy question, and this is what's been so interesting to us. I think a lot of people, when we first heard about this, said, can they do that? And I said, what studies do they need to do before they can do it to show that there won't be harm? And I should have known better. I've been in Indiana more than 25 years. It took me a while, though, to figure out that absolutely nothing is required to withdraw as much as you want from anywhere, send it to wherever you want, out of state or whatever. And so I think
This could all go to
that,
Chicago, right?
yeah, exactly. So I think one thing this has done is really raise the visibility of this possible gap in Indiana policy, or at least what we can ask people is, this is the situation. We want the public to understand. Currently, Indiana has no policy that limits this in any way. Are we happy with that? And so to just sort of tell the rest of you and you, what we're thinking of is, because we don't have a lot of data, but we thought at least we could do a webinar for the public and decision makers and whoever to help them to understand that this is there's a complete lack of policy here. Maybe look at some of the neighboring states, still trying to figure out what our neighboring states do.
Yeah, they don't do much either, though. I mean, so be careful. You have to stretch it a little bit. But go to Michigan if you want to find a
Yeah,
movie
exactly.
world.
Michigan is the one I know.
Yeah.
And even Ohio appears to have a
Yeah.
consumptive use permit, as far as I can tell, but we're gonna talk more with them. So I wanted to tell people, we're kind of setting that up if anybody has some ideas, but the two things we'd say is there's a lack of policy and then there's a lack of data. And that's one thing, again, groundwater isn't really my area, but the groundwater people say that, you know, loud and clear, there is not enough data available to make wise decisions at this point. And so the state should also invest
Put you
more
in after.
in doing these studies. So that's our question here.
Just this briefly.
I think
glad
that's
to see
great.
this.
I think that's
Yeah.
great. And I just want you to know, because this is a true thing. I spent the time, it was 15 years ago, a little more, where I spent time on the water shortage task force. All I talked about was what you're talking about right now. The lack of policy about low flows. There isn't any. Okay, so not only is there lack of policy about these other things that you mentioned, like we could pump 100 million gallons and sell it to Joliet, Illinois right now if we wanted to. That's actually okay. But not only that, but we don't have low flow thresholds. So there's no low flow number. I think that's important.
Okay, and the one thing, just because I'll need to leave it a while, is I wanted to tell people I recently found out that there has been a bill introduced in the legislature, and I'm scrolling down to try and find it. I think it's House Bill 1556 or something like that, and that would be
Aylesworth.
interesting to follow.
Aylesworth is
Yeah, yeah. So I don't know if anyone's behind here.
Yeah.
But it's interesting. So my hope, I guess this really isn't a question, but my hope is that this raises questions that will go well beyond this. I know Gary wants to focus on the Wabash, but I think it's an important issue, a public policy issue for Indiana much more broadly. And hopefully this gets enough attention. And I think you're doing a great job of getting the word out. So thanks.
I can do better, I think. Sorry. Ginger, did you have a question?
Jane, I just wanted to mention that there was and by the way, I spent over a third of my life in California, so I can tell you about moving water long distances. There was a study done by Dr. Nees, I'm sorry, and it can be found if you Google "study reveals need for better understanding of water use." This was a Purdue press release in 2015. And he basically found that virtually all of the water entering the Wabash River in Indiana during summer months is withdrawn and then returned to the waterway. So that study, and there may be others, are a good foundation for the discussion. Thank you.
There was a summary of that paper in the last Indiana Water Report.
A good segue to the water report.
Yeah, the water report is kind of interlaced with this. Ginger, I'm sorry, you've been waiting very patiently there, if you'd like to have the floor. Oh, you're muted right now, Ginger.
Thank you, I appreciate that. And I have a whole slew of questions, and I know you're in the infancy of this study, so some of these you may not be able to answer yet, but I'm curious about the consideration of the number of monitoring that's going to occur across this basin to accurately depict what is going on. Do you have a number of stations that you're considering, or is that still in the works? And I have like 3 questions, so I'll follow up.
Okay. It probably won't be more than 50.
And
that's including these public wells?
That's the sensors near the test wells. Maybe I had forgotten what our budget is, but it's a big number. It's a big number, and it includes both household homeowner wells and then the monitoring wells that are specifically for the tests that we do. So those will be probably temporary, relatively speaking, unless we decide to maintain and build a site there, and then we would make that a permanent feature or whatever. So many tens, maybe not 100, but somewhere between 50 and 100, I would think, total.
So I'm curious about also the geochemical impacts, and I'm probably not the one to be asking this question. It should probably be McKaylee or Tracy, but I'm going to attempt to see if there's going to be any investigations done on the potential impacts that may be from withdrawal that causes drawdown, that may release arsenic by oxygenating the aquifer, or migration of mineralized waters. I do know there are some mineralized waters in that area, so the migration of those into the freshwaters, is there going to be any investigations done to look at those two scenarios as well?
I can say that water quality is a part of what we're looking at. It may be one of the ways we can distinguish between the Taze water and the water in the alluvium, for example. And it will be probably somewhat different geochemistries just because the rocks are different somewhat, the ages are different, etc. And the oxygen levels are different. So there's probably a whole suite of things. The redox is different. So yes, the answer to that is yes. We will be looking at water chemistry as a part of this. Because by the way, it's really important to the users of the water. So the users of the water, they needed to not have too much of anything in it, so, too much arsenic certainly, or whatever. And arsenic, if it's brought in, for example, that would be a problem for the discharge of wastewater. So you get into all sorts of things that we have to account for as part of this effort. Yes. Yes, and you have one more question?
Well, I think it may be beyond the scope of this. It's more, I think, an internal question, so I'll save it for another day.
Okay, but I did want to say that for example, the aerial survey thing is not going to be, again, a closely guarded sort of data set. We're going to be offering that up for review to any of the parties that are involved in this project, so we don't have any problem with that. Just like California right now, you can click on their aerial surveys that they've done through the Central Valley, and you can pull up the data set raw, and you do your own inversion on the matrices and do your own analyses with slightly different assumptions. The same will be true. We'll be able to, I think, offer that up to people in its raw form or its interpreted form, and etc.
Have you done the budget on that to determine how closely spaced those lines of flights are going to be? Or
I can only say we have a budget and we have estimated that flight line stuff, but that's talk to other people. I'm not that guy.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll probably follow up with an email.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, that was a good point you brought up, Ginger, about the water chemistry there. In addition to the arsenic, I was thinking about, I was looking through the list of some of these companies that could be a part of this LEAP construction, and there's a lot of pharmaceutical companies. So I wonder if you'd also want to do kind of the pharmaceutical compounds also, assess what's there already, so that when you have these monitoring wells in place, you can kind of look and see if anything's changing after that. But yeah, that was on my list of questions, was what type of water quality is being done, and could it be kind of redone after some construction comes in and whatnot.
We will. I can't follow each of those chemicals, let's say, but I think there is, again, that's really Rhett Moore's piece of the project. He's going to be looking at the chemistry. I mean, he was on NAPWO at the USGS doing just that. So I think he is that guy that's going to help us do the analysis both of the river chemistry and the aquifer chemistry to better understand, using normal tools that exist, try to figure out what the chemistry will be like as the water arrives in a collector well. Obviously, the source is one of the factors that is determined by that, and then what's in those different sources. What are those, so the aquifer adjacent to the river itself. The river itself doesn't stay the same all year either too, so there's a winter and a summer flow, and there's different chemistries in each, and temperatures, and because of the different temperatures, there's a twofold difference in the viscosity of the river, so that the river water has half the resistance in the summer as it does in the winter because of the change in temperature. We're going to account for all these things because it will change the ratios of where the water is coming from. I need everyone on this project that's on this call to maintain their this is important, and it can't work without everyone's comments and ideas, and we can't know that enough unless we get everyone's eyes on this.
Yeah, go ahead, Dave, I'm sorry.
So Jack, just looking at the LEAP website, it looks like it's hosted by the IEDC. Is the IEDC funding your work?
Yes.
And I guess a follow-up question is, when you're looking for feedback and reviews, are you interested in, I know you're interested in getting that, but is the IEDC also interested in getting that feedback? Because I'm just thinking, do we need to be more transparent at the state as well that we're doing this with them? Are they interested in getting that information directly from us?
I think I'm the open door version of the IEDC. They're kind of if you want to know, if you kind of get they're not big on sharing, just because of the nature of their work. What they do is they try to create development, and the model for that, the sort of standard model is, get the development thing to happen and let's go. It's a let's go agency. And but what I have done, and this is important to the group, is I've convinced them that there is no project without public participation. I just said that for your return, Jane. There really isn't. I can't think of it. This cannot happen without the full spectrum of analysis and sort of all the people have seen it, all the people have their the understanding of the same thing. So what I want to make sure of is that we're all talking about the same thing. And as long as we start there, the interpretations and implications are wherever they go. But the data from the beginning have to be the same data. And the story behind why the data is needed and what the gaps in our policy are, et cetera, like that, Jane, that's the kind of thing we're trying to figure out. We need to change and modernize, and I'm trying to modernize the front end, and then the policy I want to be, the policy will have to be made, right? We've got to figure out how to create policy that, that is more modern. So, yeah. Go ahead,
just 1 second, I'm sorry, Stan. Gary's been waiting to make a comment for the past couple of weeks.
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead.
There.
Yeah, I want to try and boil a bunch of stuff together and be as brief as possible. You just mentioned that the IEDC is a get things done agency. So, my personal and sort of humanitarian concern is the people in Boone County that are sort of getting steamrollered over for potentially 11,000 acres of development. They're working on a few thousand right now, but there are a lot of people whose homes and farms are sort of up in the air. But besides that, you also mentioned that, well, and on that note, I'm concerned my concern has been, a lot of people's concerns have been that, you know, they're steamrolling ahead and they're going to make the water thing work, you know, however, whatever they need to do. Because there's going to be facts on the ground and you know, stuff's, you know, the cart's going to be way in front of the horse. But you also mentioned that, you know, this is not 1950 anymore where we dam rivers willy-nilly and that sort of thing. It wasn't very long ago that a lot of people went through months and months of frankly hell and their lives disrupted because of a crackpot scheme to dam the White River in Anderson for, you know, what they wanted as economic development. You know, the governor put 600 grand into that, and fortunately it was finally quashed, mainly through public uproar. But you know, the LEAP development is entirely political, and I need to speak from that aspect because I've been very deep into politics, particularly with the environment, for a very long time. You know, there's no need for that to happen in Lebanon. Frankly, you know, they should be talking about smart growth and putting things where there are the resources. For example, if they want a microchip plant, they might put it in Gary, where there's a need for development, and you've got water right there. So there's not necessarily a need to move, you know, vast amounts of water like California does, or North Dakota, or what have you, for very large distances in Indiana. It's being smarter about how we do things instead of, you know, frankly, what's happening here, it seems to me, is just sort of a magical belief that putting this humongous development halfway between Purdue and Indianapolis is magical somehow. I don't know. You know, we need development in Indianapolis, where Lilly is already, for example. Other cities need development. Lebanon does not need it. But that's just the pitch I want to make. So, you know, there should be a common sense basis to this entire discussion. I'm glad we've got some science going into it, you know, versus what happened with Anderson. But there's still sort of a logical disconnect in the whole scheme. So I'll just end it there.
I think that those comments are relevant in the hallways of the Capitol.
Yep.
I think you should probably talk to your representatives or knock
Well,
on the door of the IEDC and let them know what you think.
I wish they were invited today. I wish they could have been here, and of course you kind of just said why they're not. But you know, so I'm just kind of bouncing that off of you. If maybe you could bounce it back to the IEDC, but anyway, I just want to put that into the conversation.
I will not be bouncing that off the IEDC, just for your information.
Yeah.
They've hired me to do one thing, and I'm trying to do that one thing.
Yeah.
And it's not political. It's technical, and it fits into this group's
Yes.
portfolio of knowledge. So
I absolutely believe that.
yeah.
My question is, and I may have missed it, may have covered this before I came on. Where does the project or the study testing that you are tasked with doing, where does that fall within the overall IEDC project schedule? Will your work be completed before the project moves forward, or will it continue moving forward while you're doing your study?
It's simultaneous.
So if your studies and the results from those studies came up with negative impacts, would that stop that project? Be able to stop that project, or
Direct intakes have been already talked about. So there's other ways to skin the cat. And I'm proposing these collector wells because of the biological and other sort of advantages that you get when you pull water through the aquifer. You do less damage, or you have less problems with the water itself when you have to deal with the groundwater adjacent to the river. You just get fewer temperature and water quality fluctuations, as well as all of the impacts associated with the life in the river itself. So, by the way, you know what the bailout is for all of this. It's good to know what is Plan B, and the Plan B is Newport. The well field in Newport pumped more than 60 million gallons a day when it was retired. And the Newport well field is a set of collector wells in less than 100 feet of sand and gravel, or about 100 feet of sand and gravel, in a fairly narrow channel, relatively speaking. There's not much near it. It's a longer way through that river, part of the river, but that's possible. You could get the water there. We know that. It's been done. So it's not like this is going to, there isn't a, oh, it won't work at all. There's a, oh, we'll have to do this instead. Just so you know.
Okay, yeah, that's new information.
Well, it's just, yeah, it's, yep, that well field has been there, is just an old artifact, and it's still being, one of the wells is being used, I think. But, so we know this works. This isn't like a question about can't work, but, yeah.
Jack, I'm sorry, can you repeat what you said about impacts of taking from the aquifer versus taking from the stream? You said something and I didn't fully process it. Can you say it again?
Okay, and who's speaking?
Oh, my name is Shannon.
Okay, Shannon. Okay, Shannon. I used to be a surface water treatment plant operator at a water utility, and our treatment plant was on top of a creek that we took the entire creek into the treatment plant during the summer. 20 million gallons a day, just to the north and east of downtown Salt Lake City. And my job was to deal with all the changes in the water quality as it came through the plant. So as it came through the plant in spring runoff, you had to deal with all the sediments. And as you dealt with the sediments, you'd have to change chemistries, etc. So there's like a real active management of the treatment process as you're dealing with the fluctuating water quality. And so the task of that 120 MGD plant was tracking the intake water quality and then adjusting all of the feeds to manage that change. So what I'm saying more or less is that if you take water directly out of the river, you have to deal with all those kind of relatively super rapid changes in water chemistry that happen when rainfall events happen upstream. And so there is all those changes are buffered by a lot when you pull water from the aquifer. The temperature fluctuations are attenuated, and the chemistry fluctuations are attenuated. But you'll still, just like the river itself, you'll still see harder water in the late fall and late summer and early fall, because there isn't as much runoff usually in the river at that time. And so you'll see these effects, and all I'm saying is those are less than they would be if you were taking it directly out of the river. So not only do you have to deal with sludge, which can be a big deal when you're dealing with this, large volumes like this, you have to deal with sludge management and how to discharge the waste and et cetera. You don't have that issue with this water that would be from the aquifer adjacent to the river. That's why Louisville water is shifting over from surface water slowly to sort of this RBF water. That's what I meant. That's the full enhanced with ornament story.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Why was the Newport well field closed down? Was it just they didn't have a usage for it, or as someone that's haven't heard too much about it?
Yep. Okay, Newport was the DOD facility, and Newport became the place where VX was neutralized. About 20 years ago it started, and it neutralized all the VX nerve gas agents. Nobody wanted to be there at the time, apparently. You know, I mean, it's sort of not, there aren't that many people that live in that part of the state. But it's right adjacent, the wells are right adjacent to the Wabash River, and the DOD facility is to the west of there, kind of up on the bench, far away. So, and we've tested the water there. We have done a decade ago, we did a geophysical survey up the Wabash River too. We looked at where there were more and less clays underneath the sediments of the river for this whole reach from above Newport, I think, or even below Newport, all the way around the bend in the river. So we did that as a part of a project that we did for a utility. And that's what, I mean, we did a bunch of things that helped us see the Newport facility, and we looked at the construction records and their pumping records and et cetera, to try to understand what they saw when they pumped it at that rate. So there's a few old documents. They're all awesome. They're beautiful. They're interesting old fragments of knowledge. So.
Just had a lot of discussion. I don't know if anyone's got any last thoughts or questions here. You got something, Mr. Moody?
Yeah, Jack, just to touch briefly on what we were just saying about the IEDC, I just wanted to say that, you know, you're a very professional and highly regarded, and so you wouldn't go along with, you know, putting a square peg in a round hole because they want you to, for example. You know, I'm sure that...
I make my living disappointing my clients.
Well, I'll hope for a lot of that, but so you know, the microchip plant, for example. I mean, you know, but it gets back to the whole, you know, 100 million gallons per day kind of thing. So if it doesn't seem, if at some point that, and a lot of people think that it's not feasible right now, but I'm sure you would tell them that and tell them things that they don't want to hear. I just wanted to suggest that you should, you know, Professor, I'm going to call him Nyes, said if you have users who are seriously taking water out of the Wabash, and I think he's talking about the 100 million, and not putting it back into the Wabash, I would have serious concerns about that. So I would just suggest you get with him first thing. And
who do I get with?
Loring, he goes by Larry, Nies, and he did that 2015 study I mentioned. And he's been interviewed.
We're familiar with that study.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's been in a lot of the news on this recently, so he's got a lot to say.
Jane, is he a Purdue professor, or is this are you
Yep.
there still?
Nope.
Jane left.
Okay.
We lost Jane.
He is a
professor. Very nice.
Nice.
Okay.
Yeah, if someone's got the full name. Oops, sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm done.
I was saying, if anyone has like the full name or the person's email, go ahead and drop it in the chat. I was just trying to spell it based off hearing the names and whatnot. Yeah, that'd be a good person to follow up with there.
I think he's NIES at purdue.edu, probably, but double check.
Hey Jack, Shannon in the chat had an interesting question. She asked how many gallons per day is this project trying to pull? Do we have that information?
No, we don't even know the demand side. We don't know, because no one's signed the papers, you know, no one's signed up for the project. So it isn't even, there's right now we're ahead of the demand. We're before we even know the demand.
Well, IEDC is projecting 100 million gallons per day just off the top of their heads. I mean, that's kind of what they would like to do. So that's where that came from.
Yeah, well, that's a number that's being thrown around. I mean, it might honestly be less. It isn't clear what the numbers are going to be. And for everyone's benefit, I mean, that would be what, 20% of the lowest ever measured flow at that site. 20% of the flow of the Wabash is what at its lowest ever recorded flow. Something on that order. 10%, 20%. It's not insignificant. That's why the idea of releases. Go ahead.
Is that, so are you using the upper end of 100 million gallons per day? That's equivalent to about 154 cubic feet per second, is that right? And
Yeah.
that's about, you're saying that's about 10% of the lowest flow ever recorded? Or 20%?
20-ish.
20, all right,
20,
that's
it's bigger.
close to
It's
what-
25, maybe even 25, a quarter of the flow, something in that range.
That, our back of the envelope calculations show something similar. That's interesting.
Okay.
I appreciate you throwing that number out there.
Okay, and I worry over it just like you do. I'm thinking, well, what is that? And I have done all the hydrograph analysis and say, how many even seasons would that be above 5% of the lowest flow, and how many years would it be? You know, so I'm trying to figure out the probability of these flows being even measurable. You know, but that's the point of having, I think, options and management strategies for low flows. I think that's essential, ecosystem-wise.
Can I just say, Jack, I think you're in a unique position because of the work that you have done in Hamilton County and the Central Indiana Water Study to show that, you know, that their water was being lost to downstream. I think you're in a unique position to be able to have this discussion and look into this in a way that is very thoughtful. So I appreciate you bringing this to the group.
I couldn't do much without the group, though. You understand that too. I mean, this group is sort of the reality check of all of this, you know, and that's what and it's also the proper way to do a project like this. We need to have voices, multiple eyes. So, yeah. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, yeah, some really great discussions on quite an impactful assessment and later on urban development that's going on the next year or so here. Moving on along on our agenda here, we had talked last meeting about